Welcome, Vilas. Welcome to our Hangar podcast session. I'm really excited to have you here join us. I've known Vilas for now several months, and have jammed on so many different topics around developer experience. And Vilas himself is also very knowledgeable as well as passionate about this space. So let's start with a quick introduction, Vilas. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Vilas. I used to work at a company called Netflix. In some of you may have known it. I learned the basics of how to build platforms and create a good developer experience there. And then I got an opportunity to build out developer productivity as a team at Walmart. I stayed there for about 4 years. At the end of which, I got a chance to work in a completely different environment, fintech. But I discovered that the problems are the same in terms of what DevEx is and what developers need and how they need to be enabled. So I got to work there and change a lot of things there. And then I got to work in the logistics and transportation space at Truckstop. And same problems, right? Same questions. Platform engineering, DevEx. What does it mean? Who does it need to be? Who needs to get money for this? Who do we need to tap in for this kind of work? All of that is the same question. So I'm excited about this. I'm very passionate about it. And Ankit, I will say this: like all of the conversations that we have had has resulted in some really good thought things for me that I've taken back to the team, and we've discussed like why is this not discussed enough? So that's the reason I'm here, and let's talk more about it.
Amazing. So we'll start a little bit from your background. Given you have worked
Sounds
in
good.
so many different companies, maybe you can share both similarities as well as differences in how those companies handle DevEx.
Sure. The DevEx term is quite new. Previously, it was either called developer productivity. Even developer productivity is fairly new. I would say in the last 10 years or so. There never used to be a developer productivity team. So that was a significant change from like before Netflix, I was about 5.5 years at Comcast. There was no developer productivity area. There was teams that would help you with your challenges. Like there would be a platform team or something like that that would help you, but there was more infrastructure centric or more common tools centric. So that has changed significantly. I think there is an identification that if we want our developers to perform really well, we need to give them tools. We need to provide them with, and we need to measure exactly how they're performing instead of relying on just lines of code or deliveries or whatever. You need to do something more and track it, right? So there is incentives now to track it. So that's changed from my time at Comcast and Netflix. Even at Netflix, it was very outcome based, right? In a sense that there is a certain outcome you're building for that, and hence you develop tools for it. Developer productivity was a good side effect of building really good tools. Whereas in Walmart, it was more investing, right? Like let's invest. So the question then became, how much do you invest? So that's where in 2017-18, that's where we really dug into what should be the size of a team that needs to help someone at the scale of Walmart. And then we had to discover everything. Like that is the first time we discovered platform is also a product, right? Platform also needs product people. We also need to design and develop a roadmap, and that's why that all of that happened, and that's when investment became much more streamlined. All of that Build.com obviously much more streamlined. The idea existed. So these were sort of, I would say, similarities. The idea was needed. The differences were how they did it. But the big difference, I would say, Ankit, now is dev tools and DevEx as an industry. And I actually feel
Interesting.
a lot of promise because of that. Like in the sense that when you look at dev tools, you now have a set of tools you can pick from. Instead of earlier, it was like Jenkins was the best, like Hudson back in for the listeners who are like, I'm aging myself, but like I'm dating myself, but like the listeners oh yeah, we used to use that in 2006, 2007. Yes, that became Jenkins, and then we still use Jenkins in many companies today. But CI is essentially what it used to be, but now it's expanded. So I think that's where DevTools is growing. That's the difference. It's been very different. It's been become better for developers and worse in some ways. We'll talk about the worse later.
Sure. So I know we've talked a few times also about platform engineering. I would love to kind of like help one, obviously, like demystify like how do we even think about platform engineering, but also would love to put a lens on, we have like developer
Yeah.
experience, we have developer productivity, we have engineering enablement, and now we have platform engineering. So are there like differences in any of these things, or kind of many companies would probably have these, different names for the same things?
Mhm.
What's your take
Yeah.
on this?
So I'll start with a very controversial statement. Okay. Platform engineering, as it stands today, has become extremely bloated. We do not need a massive platform engineering team. That's not what platform engineering is supposed to be about. DevEx and platform engineering are not the same thing. That's it's important because every time a developer needs something to unblock themselves, we that's a gap in enablement, which means you've not given them something to get their work done faster. You've put another obstacle in front of them. Platform engineering is all about making sure you have a paved path to production. So there is a very subtle but very important line in this difference, right? A developer can develop amazing software. In order to develop that amazing software, they need state of the art tools. They need a good developer experience, right? It's like a shopping experience. You walk into a store, you want to feel like your customer experience is fantastic. That's what a developer experience is. The platform is really what that store is being built on. So it's basically the aisles, the racks, like all of that, and how that stuff is arranged. So when a customer enters, they just know that this is how it should be. Like, yeah, shirts should be like hung. Pants are in a corner there on like a rack, whatever. Like that's your platform, right? What we have done, sometimes some people do, is they tend to munch the two, and those are not the same. So I want to be very clear. So I think first of all, I'm not very happy about the developer productivity term, because productivity almost feels like you're wringing something out of a person. Like, how productive can this person be? Enablement or developer experience seems much more like you're serving that team. So it's an internal service that you're doing to make sure that your talent that you're hiring has the best possible ability to succeed and deliver. Platform engineering, I have lots of thoughts, but I do feel it's too broad right now.
Interesting. Do you think then, in some ways, the ways companies define platform engineering is potentially a combination of the infrastructure, DevOps teams, and then including the DevEx teams?
That is exactly the problem and the good part of it. Like, in a sense that it's good because within a company, you're creating a one-stop shop for the developer to get all their answers, right? I mean, that's a theory anyway. You say, oh yeah, I don't need to know anything more than my business logic. I do my business logic, I check it in, and then everything is just magically going to the production, right? And then managed. However, this is not true. And the very fact that we combine all of these functions, by the way, DevOps is not a function. This is just my pet peeve, but DevOps is not a function. DevOps is a way of doing things. But let's imagine that you had a team that says DevOps team, right? A release engineering team, a engineering effectiveness team, or a infrastructure team, Terraform teams. I've seen all kinds of those, right? All of those, when they come together, you have now created it's almost like a bureaucracy inside the engineering department, where in order to get something done, you are now moving from pillar to post to try and get something done. And what happens is every person has their own domain that they want to hold on to. They're subject matter experts in that. They have decided the policies, the processes are different. And so imagine if you wanted to, let's say, instantiate a new microservice and put that in production. And let's imagine this microservice needs a solution for backend databases, right? So let's say you're creating a backend Java program and it needs a distributed a relational database that is distributed in a native cloud native solution. You, as a developer, may not care exactly what name it's given. It can be anything, right? It does not. It can be Oracle, it can be SQL, MySQL, whatever, SQL Server, MySQL. I don't care. Give me a relational database. As if I need I need a blob store. Give me a blob store. I don't care what it is. But that's not how it works. Today we have experts who are like, oh, you want something, you come to me. I'll only give you this specific kind of response. And sometimes we ask our developers to define what they need, and that in itself is failure because they are not the experts at doing it. Platform engineers are. So I think while it's good that we have all of these areas defined, it's become too much of a struggle, a power struggle almost within that group, and that's not healthy as an industry for us to encourage. I would rather have very clear outlines of exactly what needs to be done, but platform engineering itself becomes a little smaller. DevEx becomes hand in hand, like coordinating with it, but there is very clear handoffs, very clear responsibilities on who owns what. That's the whole reason platform engineering began in the first place, is we wanted someone to own it, not disappear in a sea of people. So that's what I think is a challenge right now. So yes, it is a combination of all of those.
Interesting. So let's move on to kind of like, one of the things we are anyways coming to, which is understanding how do we even think about impact of DevEx, but from a team perspective, how should they think about impact and ROI and kind of like, all the efforts that they're
Yeah.
doing, there's hundreds of things they can work on. How how can they provide more leverage, or how can they define an impact which leadership can understand?
Yeah, so I think that's a first of all, I will give credit where it's due. The whole idea behind the Metrics was very sound, and it actually made the industry think really hard about how they were measuring things. Um, but Metrics is the start of where you sort of begin. If you really think about it, if you squint really hard, Metrics are a proxy for what your customer is seeing or experiencing, right? So for me, DevEx is meaningless if the end goal of your company is not being achieved, right? So you are essentially seeing top line revenue growth, you are seeing bottom line expense reduction, efficiency improvement. It has to be tied to that, right? So if you think about the Dora metrics, they are actually trying to get there, but they obviously did not go all the way. But that is a start. Change failure rate. How often are you pushing something to production, new feature that is failing, and you have to roll it back, right? Or fix it forward, whatever it is. And then the customer is seeing that or not seeing that enough. Like basically they're waiting for something and they're not getting the feature as quickly. That is a customer facing feature, right? I think that needs to be the way to measure, Ankit, the effectiveness of DevEx, right? A developer who is churning out code, but you're not getting any output from the customer's perspective, is not really giving you any value. Not that the DevEx, the developer is not working hard enough, but it's really not something that your business really values. So what happens is when you approach a company and you say, hey, this is what I want to build, an executive, and you say, this is what I want to build, it's just a DevEx team. The first question is going to be, how does it benefit the business? And so those metrics are really critical. So for me, it's all about the customer. I feel very strongly about measuring those outcomes from the customer's perspective, right? How often does a customer have had to abandon their session midway because of a backend failure, right? Because you were pushing something that you weren't supposed to push, or you assumed that this is going to be a no effort, no traffic change push, and but it happened, right? Or you forgot to turn on the flag after you released it, right? So what happened is the people that were supposed to get the new experience got a worse experience. They didn't get the new experience, they didn't get the old experience, they're stuck somewhere in between. That's a failure that we need to measure and we need to quantify it. I think this is the thing that is we are not doing very well. We need to quantify failures and then attach them to how we can improve DevEx. I think that failure is, for me, a valid reason to invest in DevEx. Right? Saying, okay,
Interesting.
yeah, I wish we had done this verification. Like, for example, a lot of teams I know that don't have performance testing environments. Right? It's an expensive effort, right? You set up an environment that is clean, gets production like data, people run tests on it, and then that's a stage. But usually it's either asynchronous or happens post, or it only happens when there is an incident, and then we're like, oh, let's reproduce this in stage. But imagine if that was part of your thing. Maybe it's a dev tool that essentially allows you to do a profile of your application and has it ready as a report even before it goes to production readiness, right? Now that's a tool that can be built by an infrastructure team as well as a DevEx team together. That for me would be an enablement that will pay for itself. If you look back, let's say 12 months, and you see 10 events that happened, each of costing maybe 100,000, right? for each event, that's $1 million that you just found. If you push half a million into that, you're basically trying to pay forward for what you need from DevEx. So I think that's why it's important that the customer metrics are used. And when you measure from the customer outcomes, you immediately find the money that you need to invest. This is exactly how we did it, both at Walmart as well as Bill, is we went back from the customer's perspective.
Interesting. That's a very like concrete example, right? Like kind of like where you've seen impacts of, okay, there was like incidents
Yeah.
that caused like $100,000 worth of money, and then again, the argument you can make is like, building new tools or
Mm-hmm.
like this platform will help you eliminate that cost. I think there's also like situations where, let's say, kind of like build cost, right? Let's say this is
Yeah.
also a very common conversation we've had with some teams where they're thinking about like, adopting systems like Bazel, which help you run builds
Mm-hmm.
faster and like use remote
Sure.
caching, which also provides like faster feedback for the developers, reduce compute cost. Some of the challenges that these people have getting kind of like buy-in from the organization is, how do we actually like foresee that this is
Mm-hmm.
going to make this much impact before you actually like start working on it, right? Because there are
Yeah.
things where you improve efficiency and there are issues where you can completely eliminate an error. If you completely eliminate
Yeah.
an error, that's easy to measure. When you improve
Yeah.
efficiency, unless you kind of like have, I
Yeah.
don't know, some sort of like a
Agree.
uh, projected,
Yeah.
improvement, like how do you even, quantify that?
There's actually a very simple exercise that can be done by other teams. I've done this, and it doesn't take too long. So for 1 week, um, open up a spreadsheet of your choice, whatever, like Sheets or Excel or whatever, and ask each of your team members, each of your devs, to start creating topics that others can vote against. Right? What, for example, I'll tell you this. I need to manually build this library every time there is a dependency change. Right? That's let's say one complaint, and then others will be like, yeah, that it takes me time. How much time does it take? Let's create a cumulative ad. In 1 week, at the minimum, you will see, because we are voting, right, and we can stack rank them based on the votes and the number and the amount of time. You will see, right, no matter how amazing your team is, right, or how bad the team is, you will see some ideas bubble up to the top. Right there is the time that you get. Like, let's say you come up with like, okay, total we spend 2 hours a day per person or per team, and let's say you have 10 teams, that's 20 hours wasted on just one thing. Let's imagine that's waiting for the Jenkins agent to be available. That's an easy fix. Just add more agents and then make sure that you cut it down as soon as the utilization is low. You immediately like, you scale it down, right? But you can scale it up quickly as you see traffic coming in, or you can just plan for traffic to be up at certain time. Those are easy fixes, but the improvement is you giving back time to the developer. If you look at a developer's sort of pay, right, you say, let's say $90 to $100 on an average per hour that they make, you immediately find money. Like that's the measurement. So if you start with this very simple concept, we do a survey, we put all of these ideas in one place, you have essentially created a DevEx debt sheet, right? And that essentially you can send that all the way up to your executive teams, your board. They can see it and be like, yeah, that seems crazy. Why the hell are we spending these many hours wasted on just this one thing? Like, can we do something to do it better? I mean, if you couldn't release features, uh, everything will start getting questioned, right? And so for me, that's where this value lies. So I think an exercise like this is very concrete. This is possible. I've done this. Is very meaningful because the team participates. So it's sometimes I feel quicker than a survey. Is like people are saying, this is what I faced right now. Like, I hate this thing so much. I want to put that topic down and get others to vote for it who I know face the pain. So it's a very nice exercise that you can do, and that gives you a nice ROI. Like, the ROI is right there. Imagine if this 2 hours was just 10 minutes, right? Like,
Nice.
that's your ROI.
Amazing. So what do you recommend like people do these type of exercises as sort of retrospectives or like as part of surveys? How have
So I
you
think there is need.
tested that
Yeah. So
before?
I think the way we have done this is like we start off with the baseline, right? So you
Hmm.
start off with the baseline at some point because you don't have anything to start with. And then that baseline has to be updated quarterly, right? So you basically say, okay, you know these questions. You guys put those topics in and you voted for it. Are we doing better or worse? Right? And you do not want to keep all the topics. And you obviously don't want to keep that long tail. You want to keep maybe the top 50, let's say. You keep the top 50, and or maybe if it's less than that, then you keep the top 20. But then you essentially start saying, are we making progress on this? If not, yeah, that's a problem. Because we are essentially knowingly continuing to be inefficient, which means we're not building tools, we're not enabling you. Which, if you're not enabling you, we are not serving the business.
Right.
And I think that's the immediate thing that is very transparent. But yeah, I think that's the way to do it. Is like the cadence has to be regular. We talk about tech debt, right? So much. This is a significant form of tech debt, right? If you think
Right.
about DevEx debt, right? Like how can I not? It's almost like unenablement, like or disenablement. You're basically saying you cannot do this. Like stop. You cannot deploy to prod. It's almost like that, right? Not all gates are good gates. These are one of those bad gates.
Interesting. So I remember switching gears a little bit. I remember we talked
Yeah, sure.
about at one point um, how, like, Metrics is a good place where you can actually measure productivity, kind of like from the
Sure.
point a developer starts writing code to the time it gets into production, and like how reliable your
Hmm.
production systems are. There is one aspect around, like, let's say a developer has to start a new service which requires, like, different types of infrastructure, and like the aspects of, like, even before a developer starts writing code, there are certain requirements, there are certain things that
Hmm.
blocks developers from moving
Yeah.
fast. And those are the things which are really hard to measure, right? Like almost certain things,
Yeah.
like, okay, you have a project that you were assigned, or you
Yeah.
have to do this quarter. By the time you actually start writing code, there's already a lot of time that has been spent, you know
Oh
not
yes.
just like not just like in terms of, like, scoping out the product specs itself, but like also
Yeah.
actually when you have to figure out, like, how is this service going to be built, how it's going to interact, like how it's going to, like, get spun up.
Hmm.
Do you have any thoughts around, like, how that plays into DevEx? Is it like actually DevEx, or is it like part of that infrastructure that we were talking about before?
Yeah.
uh,
I do have thoughts. I also have hopefully experiments that have proven out this idea. So if you think about the life cycle of the developer, right, there is three significant, how does this slowness causing stages. Okay, one is onboarding. That's when either a developer is coming in new, or a developer is just switching teams, switching projects, getting back to an old project. Like those are times that it takes time to get your machine back to where you need it to be, so you can start building stuff again. You need to get that old VM back in that specific state, or crap, that code is old. I have lots of conflicts with my old branch that I kept stale for a long time and all that, right? So that's your onboarding. The second one is the day to day, right? Which is you come in, I don't know, Monday morning, and you're like, what was I doing on Friday? Yeah, I don't know, but let me try building it, and something failed. And you're like, okay, what's going on? Like, who changed this? And then you track that person, you fix it, all of that, right? Or tests fail, and you're like, now fix the tests, whatever. Like that's your day to day. And the last one is refactoring, like big refactors, right? Or small refactors. When you refactor something, you're quite literally changing how the business dependency on that thing works, right? I'm obviously exaggerating with a very good reason, is because developers sometimes need that empathy to form, where developers know what they're impacting, right? They're impacting a customer's experience. No matter how small the refactor, I've seen people say, oh, this is just a small variable change. No, it broke the system in production. So yeah, that's not simple enough. So one line change, one thing change, it's still going to cause an impact. So I think that reality has to strike in. So those are three significant areas where there is measurements needed, right? Onboarding times, like ideal onboarding times, is you want your developers to be able to be productive by the middle of their first week. And what I mean by that is, theoretically they should be able to do a git clone and then finally do a commit in the first 3 to 4 days of their being in the job. And I'm not saying they need to understand everything about the code, but they need to be able to do that, which means everything in their machine is set up the way they wanted, which means most of the stuff is coming hopefully out of the box, right? And then they just do a git clone, they get the code builds very quickly. They can check out a branch, they can make a small change, check it in, see if it goes. If they can do something more productive than that, that's fantastic. You have an amazing hire on your hand. But at least at the very minimum, they need to be able to do that comfortably without having to go question 10 different people. Right? That's one measure of onboarding. Right? Day to day, your builds should not be taking more than between 10 to 25 minutes is where it is. If your build's hitting 30 minutes, you are either running a too large a module, or you have not really sorted problems within the pipeline enough. So if CI is taking more than 30 minutes, that's a problem. CI should be such that you check in, you CI runs, and then you get back. Like the moment merge completes, CI runs, or the merge CI also runs fast enough, and then it's merged, main runs, you know exactly where things are. And then finally, refactoring. If you are running refactors, if you're going to spend more than 4 weeks on a refactor job, yeah, we have a problem. That's money that's down the drain. So that means DevEx has not, sorry, developers have not been given enough tools, and there is not enough testing, there is not enough protection around that code, especially with like people who are trying to do monolith to micro monolith, whatever kind of thing. That's where this shows up. And so these are three things where I see like the biggest challenge, and these need to be measured very differently from my
Interesting.
perspective.
So in Google, we used to have a saying where
Hmm.
everything, all the pieces of code are either in beta or they're deprecated. So it's like
Exactly.
things are like
Yeah,
always things are always like constantly moving. So
I
one
know.
of the things
Yes.
actually I always wonder, especially like typically DevEx organizations
Yeah.
are generally very small within the large organizations. I mean, there are
Yes.
exceptions like Google's and Facebook where they've invested heavily,
Sure.
but like reality is most companies don't invest as much. So I
Correct.
think then one challenge that comes up in most of these organizations is how do we prioritize, right? And I think there's another part of it which is given that obviously they also get called the platform team. Uh, Many times there are aspects of the code maintenance, like even refactors or like upgrading libraries and services that
Hmm.
fall into these teams itself, right? Like
Oh
I've
yes.
seen many DevEx teams also kind of like doing all these upgrades and security maintenance.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on like how can teams really, you know, like DevEx teams can really like build their roadmaps and actually like prioritize more efficiently and effectively to show that impact?
Yeah, so I think this is on this one, right, Ankit? I don't believe DevEx teams can prioritize anything themselves. It has to be a very public ritual, right? So I'll explain what I mean by that. For any of the horizontal teams that I've worked with, right, which means like SRE or infrastructure teams or DevEx, which I would also consider horizontal. In some companies, they still have quality teams, so quality teams, their roadmaps and their priorities need to be publicly voted. Like when I say public, I mean within the company, right? It needs to be voted on. You do not define a priority that your developer disagrees with, right? So you only prioritize what your customer really wants. And for these teams, the internal customer is the developer, is maybe for some cases, it's probably the product owners, the product managers, right? Someone like that. So the prioritization comes from there. So the reason I'm saying this is if you have a public, let's imagine there is a public, not public, internal website that is facing every other engineer and product person within the company. And then they get to vote on what they think is the most important thing for their perspective for delivery, right? You are automatically provided with a nice, how to say, like it's a very clear prioritization list. And at the end of it, you're basically saying, this is what we're picking because this is what was chosen as the next most important thing by developers, by product. Right, so you now have a very clear, crisp answer on this. I
Interesting.
have tried to do prioritization both ways. Like I've tried to do prioritization where we prioritize internally and then we meet our stakeholders to explain why the priority is important. And I've also tried this. This method is way more clear for people because
Interesting.
in the former method, when I go to someone and explain this is why I prioritize this high, people tend to disagree a lot because there is no investment from them, or they'll say, yeah, this is great, but I actually needed this yesterday. Like, why haven't you done this yet? So what you realize is
Interesting.
that priorities change. What
Hmm.
they're really looking for is a vote. How do I push this higher? How do I make this higher? So giving them that responsibility is actually really important. So you give them skin in the game, stakeholders, and then when they vote for something, they know they have asked for this quarter, right? We'll say, this is how much time I have from the team. This is what the asks were. If we map them, we are over by this much. This is going to come next quarter, right? It's very clear. You can do it monthly. People can try and do that. So I think for me, the prioritization exercise, I've tried both ways. The way where I decide priorities and then I work with product managers to make them understand this, that doesn't work as easily as this one does.
Interesting. So this sounds great, but the reality is many times there's also a request from top down, right? Like kind of when I
Oh
say top
yes,
down,
oh yes,
there is also like,
yeah,
security teams. If security teams are asking
yeah,
for something, that's not something that developer themselves care as much about, right? That's not going to significantly improve their life. Like how do you think about prioritizing and like slicing or
yeah.
like, slotting these things
I
as
should
well?
clarify. Yeah, so actually, that's a very good point, Ankit. So one thing I did not mention, which I should mention, is that we don't just take the priority and do it. Like we're looking at those priorities with objectives, like OKRs. So there are objectives that people are voting on, and then those objectives translate into key results that are then worked on by the team. The top level executive team and the C level team can also contribute to those objectives, right? They can be voted on, or we'll say, you know what, this voting is full. We are getting 3 slots are taken. There are 7 more slots out of the 10 slots. If 3 taken, 7 more available. What do you guys want to vote for? So we can do that. Now, here is a challenge that I've seen is not that things come in at the start of the sprint. It's things come in the middle of the sprint. It like comes in, no, we have to release this tomorrow because we can't lose this opportunity. That is very hard. I will not say that I've solved it, but the best way to solve it is truly by providing autonomy to people within the team. There has to be decision makers that are not bottlenecked at the very top. If I am saying I want to take a decision and I will take a decision and have to be in the room, then I am essentially not succeeding, never going to succeed. For those kind of changes, I have to provide the ability to do decisions to others, trust them, give them context, right? But then release that control. So this is obviously a very Netflix thing, like context, not control, is a very Netflix thing, but it works. It has worked for me, right? And so that is when you then say, okay, yeah, something changed. I switch it around. Communication comes up. It's a push from the team upstairs saying, oh yeah, this is something that we want to do. Understood, right? We then make changes, and the next sprint looks different. But I think so. I missed that part where it is still objectives. Objectives should always be talked to with the top. It was be consolidated with what's coming down, top down. Right? You have bottom up goals and you have top down goals, and you combine them, and then you write KRs, key results based on that. But that's how I would suggest doing it. It has worked for me. Your mileage may vary.
Amazing. Awesome, Vilas. I know this is we can go on forever for this, but
I know.
I we are kind of like already over time. So let's dive straight into the last few rapid fire questions, and we can wrap
Okay.
it up with that.
All right.
You
All
ready?
right. Rapid fire.
Okay.
Here we come. Okay.
All right. What are you most excited about in the DevEx space in the coming years?
I am really excited about people using DevEx tools, investments to do some really good work that is not necessarily AI. I think AI is a bit of a smokescreen for dev tools at this point because there is maturity that needs to be gained. It's a great tool. It can do really great work, but I think the way we are using it is not there yet. There are a few teams that are doing it really well, but not everyone is using it the right way. So I'm very excited about the people who are getting into DevEx for the reason for fixing DevEx and improving it, but not for people who are getting into DevEx because they just want to do something with AI. So
Well, I'm going to ask you the reverse question as well. Then, are
yeah,
there specific use cases of AI where you find it can apply really well with DevEx for DevEx?
yes, I think there's a lot of menial day-to-day sort of robotic work that does happen within DevEx, right? So think about creating dashboards for like Scrum Masters. At some point, we used to have Scrum Master titles, and they would create dashboards and things like that. The reason behind that was to understand how the team is doing, right? And the team composition used to change sometimes because you were doing initiative to initiative. Sometimes initiative teams are different from project teams and things like that.
Mm.
That can be and should be automated, right? The insight into those teams will have to change. So let's imagine I'm measuring DORA metrics for an organization, and the composition of that organization changes. we need metrics to be able to measure it based on the context of that composition, right? That is something where I see value. The other thing is testing. I really see a lot of AI that can help in just taking a set of requirements and converting them into some basic tests, right? Write the basic code and then I'll fill in the business logic, or I'll fill in whatever negative and garbage things I want to check in that later. But then can you create that framework for me? I think these are the places where I see a lot of promise, because these are non-trivial tasks, and in some cases these tasks can take away weeks of productivity from a team.
Interesting. And you've been in DevEx space for so long. What makes a good engineer for DevEx? Like a good candidate? What do you look for in a DevEx engineer?
I think a practitioner is the only one that can really do good DevEx. You cannot go and do development enablement if you do not know what you're developing, if you don't feel the pain of development. You have to feel that pain. It's extremely important that we realize this is not a role where someone who does not work as a developer can come in and just fix something. It's very critical to understand that. And a lot of times people tend to pack develop DevX teams with non-developers or like developer adjacent folks who have worked in a smaller role, but like they just want to do DevX, and that's why they think it's easier. It's not. You're still developing solutions. You're still delivering product, and that's the thing that is the difference.
Okay. Are
Yeah,
there any books that you recommend related to DevEx,
yeah.
but it could be outside too?
I don't think this one is related to DevX, but I think the overall theme of my talk today with you, Ankit, has been the whole outcomes perspective, right? So there's actually this really great book that I read recently, which is called. We will not. We'll take away this. Forget the fact that the authors talk about their experience in Amazon, which is great. But the thing that I took away from this book, called Working Backwards, is that you want to focus on what you want the outcomes to be, right? And you want to aim big. That's how most startup companies have begun, is like you have a passion for that end goal and you start thinking backwards from it. This is more about saying how it works, how it has worked for Amazon, how it succeeded, and how it can work. And I've actually seen this work in many companies that I've been in, where we focus on what the outcomes need to be, and you challenge the team to achieve those, right? And you find out why can't we achieve those, like what's the gap here, right? And that actually makes for a lot of really good discussions within the team, a lot of good debate, and you actually end up learning something and actually progressing towards that goal. And sometimes unrealistic goals, they may seem unrealistic, but when you work backwards you realize, yeah, this can be achieved. Like, why was I thinking it can't be achieved, right? It happens in everyday life as well, but I think this for me is important. I'll tell you why I'm mentioning this as the last thing. Someone at some point had told me there is no way you can run this build within 5 minutes. And this was for a build that was taking 25 minutes. Um, in the team, I had a pretty small DevEx team at that point. And what we did was we actually delved deep into this. We got all the help we could get from the development teams and everyone else. And we brought the runtime down, the build time down to 3.5 minutes, including all the unit tests. So we did not realize we will get there, but we had the thought in mind was we'll do it in 5, right? And then we work backwards. Okay, what do I need to do with this in 5? Okay, we'll parallelize this. We'll create number of, we'll parallelize the test. We'll do this and that and the other. And then you eventually got there. So I think that's the powerful message that I feel that this book gives you.
Very cool. Okay, this is definitely going in my reading list. And last question: are there any tools that you use
Mhm.
for DevX that you enjoy, or like, do you have any favorite tools that you take from every company? I guess.
Um, I'm going to sound really, it's going to sound sad, but I genuinely like the whole simple tools mentality, right? So I'm a big fan of Argo. I think Argo has done a great job in evangelizing CD. I think it's really important. There are a few tools which I feel are coming up, and I really want to use them. One among them is a tool called Amnik. I don't know if you've heard of it. Amnik is a cost efficiency calculator for your production environments, right? Like, it can look through different clouds and things like that. I'm really looking forward to using that a little bit more. Like I said, it's outcome based, so you can always go back and measure ROI and things like that. Um, Jenkins, man, Jenkins is still alive and kicking. I can't believe it, but it's still alive. It still does the job. That's fantastic. And then just to date myself, I really think that the build tools we have, like the Mavens, like all of the build tools that essentially got created over years, and Maven is still rocking it, right? I think those are my tools, like the very simple but really awesome tools that exist. Those are the best.
Amazing. And I can also put like references of some of these tools in the show notes so that people can reach out
Sure,
to
yeah,
us.
that'd
But
be
yeah,
great.
with
Yeah,
that, Vilas, thank you so much for this time and this session. It was a pleasure. Really, every time I chat with you, I take up with like so many notes and so many things to think about and ponder over. Thank you so
I
much for your
appreciate you,
time.
man. I appreciate, yeah, I appreciate you challenging me, and I really hope that this spars some discussions. And I would love to hear back from people if they feel that I am either one not on the right track or on the right track. Either way, I would love to hear and gain that expertise from you folks as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Vilas. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.